There are moments in history that do not care who wins an election. They are larger than ballots, larger than campaigns, larger than personalities. They arrive when pressure has been building for years, sometimes decades, and then one movement is enough to release it. These moments are not decided by votes. They are revealed by consequences. They show up when the machinery of power shifts, when the atmosphere changes, and when what was once contained suddenly breaks through the surface. This is one of those moments. It does not matter whether you like Trump or despise him. It does not matter whether you think he will win again or disappear from relevance. What matters is that a line has been crossed. A move has been made, and that move did not create something new. It unlocked something that had already been prepared. History does this when it is ready to turn a page. It waits until the conditions are right. Then it uses whatever tool is available to force clarity. You can feel it if you are paying attention. Time feels different. Events feel compressed. What used to take years now happens in months. Conversations that were once unthinkable are now unavoidable. Institutions react instead of lead. Narratives scramble to keep up with reality instead of shaping it. This is what it feels like when history shifts gears. Not with a clean announcement, but with a sudden acceleration that leaves many people disoriented. A door has opened. Not a door everyone can see, and not a door everyone is prepared to walk through. Some people will deny it exists. Others will feel it, but refuse to name it. But denial does not close doors like this. History moves whether people are comfortable or not. The only real question is who understands what just changed. Trump is not the story here. He never was. Treating him as the main character is a mistake that keeps people distracted. He is not a savior, and he is not the final villain of human history. He is not the architect of the system, and he is not powerful enough to destroy it on his own. He is something else. He is a trigger. He is a figure who touches a switch that releases forces already waiting underneath the surface. History often uses people like this, loud, polarizing, and unaware of the deeper currents they are activating. They think they are acting out of ego, ambition, or impulse. Meanwhile, something much larger is moving through them. Trump believes he is playing a political game. What he does not understand is that his movements expose fault lines that were already there. He does not invent the tension. He reveals it. He does not create the fracture. He widens it until it can no longer be ignored. That is why focusing on him as the hero or the villain misses the point. The main character is not the person touching the switch. The main character is the one whose role is activated when the lights change. Trump did not step into the spotlight to be the center of the story. He stepped into it to force the story forward. And that brings us to the part most people are avoiding. This moment is not for everyone. Not every community experiences historical shifts the same way. Not every group is positioned to respond when systems destabilize. Some people are built for continuity. Others are built for transition. Some thrive when things are stable. Others are trained by instability itself. Black people are not encountering end-time conditions for the first time. What feels shocking to much of society feels familiar to them. Legal uncertainty, economic volatility, shifting rules, and exposed hypocrisy have been part of their lived reality for generations. They have survived in conditions where protection was inconsistent and promises were temporary. That experience was not random. It was formative. For centuries, Black people have lived inside what others are only now beginning to experience. Systems that fail without warning. Rules that change without consent. Institutions that claim neutrality while practicing exclusion. When end-time conditions expand to the broader society, most people panic because they have never had to function without structural stability. Black people do not romanticize this moment, but they recognize it. They have been trained by it. This is why the current shift does not land evenly. While others scramble to preserve a version of normal that is already gone, Black communities sense that something old is finally being exposed beyond repair. They are not shocked that the mask is slipping. They have seen behind it for a long time. What is new is that everyone else is being forced to look. This is not about superiority, it is about preparation. Preparation forged through endurance, adaptation, and survival. When end-time conditions move from the margins to the center, the people who have lived on the margins carry an unexpected advantage. They know how to build without permission. They know how to create meaning without validation. They know how to survive when institutions are unreliable. So the question is not whether history is changing. That is already clear. The question is who has been trained for the change that is now unfolding. When a door like this opens, it does not ask for opinions. It asks for readiness. It reveals who understands the moment and who will be crushed by it. If this is a final transition, not the end of the world, but the end of a particular order, then someone has to carry the responsibility of moving through it. Someone has to hold memory while new structures form. Someone has to build when old frameworks collapse. History never leaves these roles unassigned. So ask yourself the only question that matters now. If this is the moment when the old story breaks and a new one begins, who has been living in training for it all along? If this is the final handoff from one era to the next, who has already learned how to survive without guarantees? Because doors like this do not stay open forever. And when they close, history moves on with or without those who were unprepared to step forward. When people hear the phrase end time, their imagination is immediately hijacked by spectacle. They picture fire raining from the sky, cities collapsing in flames, and the sudden destruction of the planet itself. Hollywood trained that reflex well. Apocalyptic imagery has been turned into entertainment, stripped of meaning, and reduced to fear. But that version of end time is not only inaccurate, it is a distraction. It keeps people looking for explosions instead of transitions. End time is not about the end of the world. It is about the end of a world, a particular order, a particular arrangement of power, value, and meaning. History has gone through many end times before. Feudal systems ended, monarchies ended, colonial empires ended, segregation as an openly legal structure ended. None of those moments looked like instant annihilation. They looked like confusion, overlap, instability, and prolonged struggle between what was dying and what had not yet fully formed. End time is a process, not an event. It begins when the assumptions that once held a society together stop working, when people no longer trust the systems that promised security, when rules feel arbitrary instead of fair, when effort no longer guarantees stability, when success feels fragile instead of earned. These are not signs of sudden collapse. They are signs that the operating system is outdated. What actually dies in an end time is not humanity, but the stories humanity told itself to justify how things were organized. Value systems collapse first. Ideas about merit, fairness, and opportunity lose credibility when they no longer match lived reality. People stop believing that hard work alone ensures success. They stop believing that institutions are neutral. They stop believing that the future will automatically be better than the past. This loss of belief is destabilizing because belief is what makes systems function. Old forms of power also begin to decay. Authority that once commanded obedience starts relying on force, fear, or spectacle instead of legitimacy. Leaders talk more but accomplish less. Institutions protect themselves instead of the people they claim to serve. Power becomes loud because it is no longer secure. This is not strength. It is insecurity on display. The concept of safety changes as well. In stable eras, safety is defined by proximity to institutions. A good job, a strong currency, a respected credential, or a powerful nation offers protection. In an end time, those markers lose reliability. People with impressive resumes feel just as exposed as those without them. Wealth tied to fragile systems feels less secure than skills, relationships, and adaptability. Success begins to look different because the old rewards no longer guarantee survival. This is why end-time moments feel disorienting. People keep applying old rules to new conditions and cannot understand why the outcomes no longer make sense. They assume something is broken temporarily, when in reality, the framework itself has expired. End time does not destroy overnight. It reveals that the foundation was already cracked. What end time is not is sudden global destruction. It is not instant judgment. It is not the erasure of humanity. It is exposure. It is transition. It is the painful overlap between an order that is dying and one that has not yet fully emerged. That overlap produces anxiety because it removes certainty without immediately replacing it. An end-time role, then, is not about escaping the planet or waiting for rescue. It is about navigating transition. It is about carrying responsibility through uncertainty. People assigned roles in end time are not chosen because they are comfortable. They are chosen because they can function when comfort disappears. They are not selected for purity. They are positioned because they have learned how to live when rules collapse. This is why end time feels threatening to those whose identity is rooted in stability. They lose reference points. They lose predictability. But for those whose history includes constant adaptation, end time does not feel like chaos. It feels like familiarity expanding outward. The danger of misunderstanding end time is passivity. If you believe end time means destruction is inevitable, you stop preparing. If you believe it means someone else will intervene, you stop taking responsibility. Both interpretations serve collapse, not survival. End time is not the end of meaning. It is the end of borrowed meaning. It forces people to redefine what matters when old guarantees disappear. It asks different questions. Not how high can you climb, but how well can you endure. Not how much can you accumulate, but how quickly can you adapt. Not who protects you, but who you are connected to. Understanding this is essential before talking about role, because an end-time role is not glamorous. It is functional. It exists to carry humanity through a shift, not to escape it. And those who misunderstand that will either panic or wait for something that was never coming. End time does not announce itself with fire. It announces itself with exposure. And exposure demands response. When people hear the word role, they often assume it implies favor. They hear it as selection, elevation, or special status. That misunderstanding has caused enormous damage because it turns responsibility into ego and calling into entitlement. A role in history is not given because a people are better, purer, or more deserving. It is assigned because a people are positioned to carry weight that others cannot or will not carry. Being chosen does not mean being preferred. It means being placed where pressure is highest. It means being put where failure would be catastrophic and endurance is required. History does not assign roles based on comfort. It assigns them based on capacity developed through experience. That capacity is rarely acquired through ease. It is formed through exposure, repetition, and survival under conditions that break most people. A historical role is a placement. It situates a people at specific points of transition, points where systems must be dismantled, memory must be preserved, and new structures must be built simultaneously. These are not symbolic positions. They are functional ones. When an old order collapses, someone has to know what cannot be lost. Someone has to remember what went wrong. Someone has to imagine what can replace it without recreating the same harm in a different form. This is why roles emerge at moments of restructuring. When stability exists, roles are hidden. Systems run themselves. Privilege insulates those at the top from consequence. But when systems fail, the work becomes visible. Someone has to rebuild trust where it was destroyed. Someone has to create coherence where meaning collapsed. Someone has to carry continuity through chaos. Those tasks are not glamorous. They are exhausting. Roles also involve holding memory. Empires prefer amnesia. Forgetting makes repetition easy. When people forget how oppression worked, they recreate it unconsciously. Those positioned to hold memory serve as safeguards against repetition. They remember the cost of certain choices. They remember the warning signs others ignored. Memory becomes a form of protection for the future. Roles also require building something new, not copying what failed, but constructing alternatives shaped by hard lessons. This demands imagination grounded in realism. It requires knowing both what to dismantle and what to preserve. People without experience of loss often rebuild the same fragile structures because they do not understand why they failed in the first place. Those who have lived through collapse carry a different perspective. They design with consequence in mind. This is where the difference between privilege and role becomes clear. Those who benefit most when systems are stable often struggle when those systems fall apart. Stability rewards proximity to power. It rewards compliance. It rewards silence. Those at the center accumulate wealth, status, and protection without having to understand how the system actually works at its edges. When collapse arrives, they are shocked because they assumed permanence. Those who are pushed to the margins experience the opposite. They receive fewer benefits during stability, but they develop skills that matter when stability disappears. They learn how to survive without guarantees. They learn how to function without protection. They learn how to build informal systems when formal ones exclude them. These lessons are not chosen. They are forced. But they create capacity. So when systems collapse, the burden shifts. Those who enjoyed stability often lack the tools to respond. Those who endured instability are suddenly required to step forward, not because they want power, but because power has lost legitimacy and something must replace it. Roles emerge not from ambition, but from necessity. This is why a role is heavy. It carries expectation without applause. It demands responsibility without reward. It often requires sacrifice without recognition. People with roles do not get to opt out simply because it is inconvenient. History does not wait for comfort. It moves forward and assigns tasks to those who are still standing. Understanding this changes how the moment is interpreted. This is not about superiority. It is about obligation. It is about being placed at the intersection of breakdown and renewal. Those who are assigned such roles do not get to pretend they are spectators. They are participants whether they acknowledge it or not. When systems are stable, privilege looks like success. When systems collapse, responsibility looks like burden. And history does not confuse the two. An end-time role is not assigned widely because not everyone is built to carry it. This is not a judgment of worth. It is a recognition of capacity. Transition periods demand specific traits that are uncomfortable, often unwanted, and rarely developed in stable environments. When a system begins to fail, the pressure does not rise evenly. It concentrates. Only those who can function inside that pressure without collapsing are able to respond effectively. The first requirement is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. End-time conditions strip away predictability. Timelines blur. Outcomes become unclear. Plans that once made sense stop working. Many people are taught that uncertainty is a temporary inconvenience that should be eliminated as quickly as possible. They are trained to wait for clarity before acting. In a transitional moment, that instinct becomes paralyzing. Those with end-time roles cannot wait for certainty. They must move while the ground is still shifting. This tolerance for uncertainty is not theoretical. It is embodied. It comes from lived experience where guarantees were never reliable. People who grew up expecting systems to function as promised experience shock when those promises break. People who learned early that systems could fail learned to build internal stability instead. They learned how to adapt in motion. That adaptability becomes essential when the future cannot be mapped in advance. The second requirement is not being completely dependent on the system that is collapsing. Dependence creates fear. Fear narrows vision. When a person's survival is tied entirely to institutions that are losing legitimacy, Every crack feels existential. That fear drives denial, not preparation. It pushes people to defend structures that are harming them because the alternative feels too risky. Those with end-time roles have already experienced partial exclusion. They have learned how to survive when access was limited or conditional. They understand that institutions can be useful without being trusted blindly. This distance allows them to see systems as tools rather than lifelines. When tools break, they replace them. They do not lose their sense of self. The third requirement is collective historical memory. End-time roles are not individual assignments, they are communal. They rely on shared stories, lessons, and warnings passed across generations. Collective memory creates pattern recognition. It allows people to sense danger before it becomes visible. It provides reference points when official narratives fail. Societies without strong collective memory are vulnerable during collapse. They treat each crisis as unprecedented. They repeat mistakes because they have forgotten the cost of previous ones. They are easily manipulated by those who promise restoration without accountability. People with historical memory do not confuse repetition with progress. They recognize when old strategies are being recycled under new language. Most of society has never lived without a functioning system. Stability was the default. Laws protected them. Markets rewarded them. Institutions reflected them. Even when inequality existed, the framework itself felt dependable. Because of that, many people were never required to develop survival skills outside formal structures. They were trained for continuity, not disruption. When that continuity begins to fracture, panic sets in. Panic looks like rage, denial, nostalgia, or desperate clinging to authority. People argue about returning to a version of normal that no longer exists. They exhaust themselves trying to repair systems that were already hollow. This reaction is understandable, but it is not effective. End-time roles require a different response. They require the ability to let go of illusions without losing direction. They require the discipline to build without applause. They require emotional regulation when others are spiraling. These capacities are not evenly distributed because they are not evenly developed. This is why not everyone has an end-time role. It is not because some people are excluded intentionally. It is because the work itself is demanding. It requires comfort with instability, independence from collapsing systems, and access to deep historical memory. Without these, people become liabilities in transitional moments. They slow adaptation. They amplify fear. They cling to structures that need to be released. Those with end-time roles are not spared difficulty. They are assigned it. Their task is not to escape the shift, but to move through it with enough clarity to carry others forward. History does not ask whether that feels fair. It asks who is ready. And readiness, in moments like this, is the difference between being overwhelmed by collapse and being positioned to shape what comes next. Trump did not create white supremacy. He did not invent racism. He did not design the systems that extracted wealth, erased dignity, and normalized inequality. Those systems were already old when he entered politics. They were established, institutionalized, and protected long before his name ever appeared on a ballot. Pretending otherwise gives him too much credit and lets the real architects of the system disappear into the background. What Trump did was something different. He made the hidden loud. He said out loud what had previously been whispered behind closed doors. He turned coded language into plain speech. He took ideas that once required polish and respectability and delivered them without filter or shame. That shift mattered more than any single policy because it removed the illusion that the system was neutral or progressing on its own. Before Trump, many people believed the system was flawed but improving. They believed racism was a leftover, not a feature. They believed inclusion was inevitable if people were patient enough. Trump did not allow that story to survive. His presence disrupted the performance. The mask fell, not because he ripped it off intentionally, but because he did not know how to keep it on. This is a recurring pattern in history. Systems often rely on a certain level of sophistication to maintain legitimacy. They need careful language, symbolic gestures, and controlled narratives to appear stable and moral. When someone enters who lacks restraint or does not respect the unspoken rules, the performance collapses. The truth does not change. Its volume does. Trump's rhetoric did not introduce new beliefs. It amplified existing ones. When he spoke, he activated permission. People who had been holding back suddenly felt free to express what they already believed. Institutions that had learned how to signal virtue without practicing it were exposed. The gap between public language and private action became visible. This exposure accelerated everything. Conversations that would have taken decades were forced into the open. Conflicts that were managed quietly became unavoidable. Tensions that had been absorbed by marginalized communities were suddenly felt by the center. What had been contained leaked outward. Acceleration is the key. Trump did not push history in a new direction. He sped it up. He shortened the distance between cause and consequence. He removed the buffer that allowed society to pretend problems were abstract. Once the mask dropped, people could no longer rely on ambiguity to avoid responsibility. They had to choose how to interpret what they were seeing. And this is where roles were activated. When the illusion of neutrality collapses, people are forced to locate themselves honestly within the system. Silence becomes alignment. Comfort becomes complicity. Those who had lived under the weight of the system recognized the moment immediately. They had never believed the mask. They had only been required to operate under it. For Black people, this exposure was not surprising. It was confirming. It validated what had been said for generations and dismissed as exaggeration. When the system spoke plainly, it revealed that survival strategies developed on the margins were not paranoid. They were necessary. The clarity did not come from kindness. It came from bluntness. This is why Trump functions as a catalyst rather than a cause. A catalyst does not create a reaction. It speeds up a reaction that was already inevitable. Trump's presence reduced the time people had to stay asleep. It collapsed the distance between lived experience and public acknowledgement. When the mask falls, roles shift. Those who depended on the performance lose orientation. Those who never trusted it gain clarity. The system's attempt to reassert control only deepens the fracture because once exposure occurs, reversal is impossible. You cannot unsee what has been revealed. Trump did not understand this dynamic. He believed he was asserting dominance. In reality, he was destabilizing legitimacy. He believed volume was power. He did not realize that power depends on belief. When belief erodes, authority weakens no matter how loud it becomes. This is the unintended prophetic function, not prediction, but revelation. Trump did not announce the end of an era. He exposed that it had already begun. His role was not to lead people forward, but to remove the final layers of denial that kept them from seeing where they already were. And when denial collapses, history does not remain neutral. It assigns responsibility. Those who can see clearly are no longer spectators. They are activated. Roles that were dormant become unavoidable. The moment demands response. That is why this period feels heavier. Not because the problems are new, but because they are no longer hidden. Exposure forces decision, and decision is what separates those who are overwhelmed by change from those whose role emerges when the mask finally falls. It is not necessary to know exactly what Trump's next move will be. Obsessing over predictions misses the point. History does not hinge on the details of his actions as much as it hinges on the reactions they provoke. The significance is not in the move itself, but in what the move reveals about the system responding to it. Every time Trump re-enters the public stage, the system exposes itself. Institutions that claim neutrality are forced to take sides. Media outlets that present themselves as objective reveal their priorities. Political actors who speak the language of principle suddenly justify contradictions. The performance strains under pressure, and cracks widen. Trump functions like a stress test. He does not need to win or lose to have impact. His presence alone forces systems to show their true structure. This is why his next move matters regardless of its content. Whether it is a speech, a legal maneuver, a campaign announcement, or a policy threat, the reaction will follow a familiar pattern. Systems that rely on legitimacy will resort to fear. Systems that rely on control will tighten restrictions. Systems that rely on narrative will amplify distraction. Each response reveals what the system values most when threatened. Power is most visible when it feels endangered. When authority is secure, it does not need to over-explain itself. It does not need constant messaging. It does not need to punish dissent aggressively. When power feels fragile, it becomes loud, defensive, and reactive. Trump's reappearances consistently trigger this state. The system begins to show how much of its authority is sustained by perception rather than substance. Each cycle strips away another layer of credibility. What once appeared as moral leadership begins to look like self-preservation. What once sounded like principle begins to resemble panic. This is not accidental. It is cumulative. Masks do not fall all at once. They slip incrementally, with each moment of stress revealing more than the last. This deepening exposure matters because people learn through repetition. The first time the mask slips, many people rationalize it. They tell themselves it is an exception. The second time, they become uncomfortable. The third time, denial becomes harder to maintain. By the fourth or fifth repetition, the pattern is undeniable. Trump's repeated returns accelerate this process. Each re-entry reinforces the same lesson. The system is not what it claims to be. This is especially important for those who once believed that progress was inevitable. Trump interrupts that belief cycle. He exposes how quickly norms can erode and how thin the veneer of stability really is. He demonstrates that institutions respond not to justice, but to threat. This realization shifts how people understand power. They stop assuming protection. They start noticing contingency. For Black people, this pattern confirms long-held awareness. The system's reactions to Trump mirror its reactions to any challenge from the margins. Defensiveness, distraction, suppression. What is different now is that the center experiences it too. What was once localized becomes generalized. Exposure expands outward. Each time Trump returns, the cost of denial increases. The system cannot pretend neutrality indefinitely. It must reveal its priorities through action. Those actions, once visible, cannot be unseen. People adjust their expectations accordingly. Trust erodes further. Dependency weakens. This erosion activates roles. When trust collapses, people either cling harder or prepare to build elsewhere. Trump's next move matters because it pushes people closer to that fork in the road. It accelerates the moment of choice. Stay invested in a system that repeatedly reveals its instability, or begin preparing for life beyond it. The importance of Trump's actions is not that they change history's direction. It is that they remove remaining illusions about where history already is. Each reaction teaches a lesson. Each exposure narrows the space for confusion. The mask does not simply fall. It falls deeper, and when it falls deep enough, neutrality disappears. People are forced to see clearly. That clarity is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because only when illusions are stripped away can roles fully emerge. Trump's next move will not end the story. It will sharpen it, and in sharpening it, it will make one thing unavoidable. Those who are paying attention will understand that the moment for preparation is no longer theoretical. It is immediate. History is filled with figures who never understood the true role they were playing. They believed they were acting out of ambition, fear, ego, or strategy, unaware that something larger was moving through their decisions. They thought they were shaping events, when in reality events were using them to accelerate a process that had already begun. These figures are remembered not for their intentions, but for the doors that opened because of them. Trump fits this pattern precisely. He believes he is playing politics. He believes he is negotiating power, protecting his interests, settling scores, and securing legacy. He believes the arena is electoral, legal, and media-driven. From his perspective, this is a game of dominance and survival within an existing system. What he does not see is that the system itself is no longer stable enough to contain the consequences of his actions. History often uses people who lack restraint because restraint preserves illusions. Those who speak carefully allow systems to hide behind complexity. Those who speak bluntly collapse distance between belief and expression. Trump does not understand the discipline required to maintain a facade, and that makes him useful to a moment that requires exposure rather than polish. He thinks he is asserting control. History is using him to loosen it. Each move he makes forces institutions to reveal how they actually function under stress. Each attempt to reclaim relevance forces the system to show what it is willing to sacrifice to maintain authority. This is not strategy on his part. It is consequence. The result is accelerated separation. Lines that were once blurred become clearer. Communities that once tried to coexist within shared illusions are forced to confront incompatible realities. Trump's presence makes it harder to pretend that everyone is operating under the same assumptions or benefiting from the same structures. The tension becomes visible, then undeniable. This separation is not primarily ideological. It is existential. People are being pushed to decide where their survival truly lies. Do they trust institutions that repeatedly reveal their fragility, or do they begin building resilience elsewhere? Do they cling to narratives that no longer match lived experience, or do they adapt to what is being exposed in real time? Trump does not set out to force these choices, but his movements compress time. They shorten the distance between realization and response. What once unfolded slowly now happens in bursts. People are given less space to sit comfortably in contradiction. They must choose alignment, even if that choice is unspoken. History uses moments like this to reorganize societies. It pushes pressure to the surface until separation occurs. Those who can adapt form new structures. Those who cannot cling to the old ones until they collapse completely. Trump believes he is fighting opponents. In reality, he is triggering a sorting process far larger than himself. This is why his lack of awareness is central. If he understood what he was unlocking, he might act differently. But history rarely relies on self-aware participants. It relies on predictable ones. Trump reacts in ways that are consistent with his character, and those reactions serve a purpose he cannot see. The communities paying attention understand this. They are not fixated on his personality. They are watching the reactions he provokes. They are studying the fractures that deepen with each cycle. They are recognizing that the system's responses reveal more truth than its rhetoric ever did. Trump thinks he is trying to win. History is using him to force decisions. It is pushing communities toward clarity by removing the comfort of ambiguity. Those who were able to delay preparation are running out of space to do so. The environment no longer supports half measures. This is what unlocking looks like. Not a dramatic announcement, but a gradual removal of escape routes. People are being guided, not gently, but insistently, toward a reckoning with reality. Survival strategies that once felt optional now feel necessary. Separation that once felt extreme now feels inevitable. Trump will never name this role. He does not need to. History does not require consent to assign function. It simply moves. And in moving, it forces those who are watching closely to understand what time it is. The question is not whether Trump knows what he is unlocking. He does not. The question is who recognizes it, and who begins preparing for the choices that his presence is making unavoidable. This was never a blessing. It should never be framed that way. Suffering does not become holy simply because people survive it. What black people endured over centuries was not divine favor. It was violence. It was theft. It was systematic destruction of bodies, families, languages, and futures. Calling that a blessing distorts reality and dishonors the cost. The only honest name for it is what it was: forced training. Training does not imply consent. It implies repetition under pressure. It implies being shaped by conditions you did not choose. For 400 years, black people were forced to learn how to live in environments where the rules were unstable, protection was selective, and humanity was negotiable. This was not education offered in classrooms. It was instruction delivered through survival. Each phase added a layer. Each generation inherited lessons it never asked for but could not avoid. Enslavement taught how to survive when law exists only to punish you. Jim Crow taught how to navigate a world where rules claim neutrality while enforcing hierarchy. Economic exclusion taught how to function when access is conditional and fragile. Mass incarceration taught how quickly freedom can be revoked without moral justification. None of these phases were optional. They were imposed. Living under laws that did not protect you forces a different relationship to authority. When the legal system does not guarantee safety, people learn to read power rather than trust it. They learn when to comply, when to avoid, and when to resist quietly. They learn that justice and legality are not the same thing. This awareness becomes crucial in end-time conditions, when laws still exist but legitimacy erodes. Living with unstable money teaches another lesson. When economic systems are unreliable, people stop assuming permanence. They learn how to stretch resources, share risk, and build value outside formal markets. They learn that wealth tied to fragile structures can disappear overnight. This creates a mindset that prioritizes adaptability over accumulation. In end-time moments, this mindset becomes an advantage. Living with denied humanity teaches the most painful lesson of all. When society treats your life as disposable, you are forced to answer a fundamental question early. Who am I when the world refuses to recognize me? Black people were forced to answer that question generation after generation. Out of that struggle came culture, spirituality, and identity that did not depend on external validation. This internal grounding becomes critical when systems that once defined worth begin to collapse. None of this was fair. None of it was chosen. But it produced capacities that cannot be manufactured quickly. You cannot simulate 400 years of adaptation. You cannot teach resilience overnight. You cannot replicate collective memory with policy or training programs. These traits emerge only through sustained exposure to instability. This is why the current moment feels different depending on where you stand. For many, the erosion of trust feels like a crisis. For black people, it feels like confirmation. The realization that institutions are unreliable is not new. The difference now is that the broader society is being forced to confront what was previously localized. End-time conditions expose what people were trained for. Those trained for stability struggle when stability dissolves. Those trained for survival recognize the terrain. Recognition does not eliminate pain, but it reduces confusion. When you understand the environment, you conserve energy. You move deliberately instead of panicking. This does not mean black people are immune to harm. It means they are familiar with harm. Familiarity changes response. Instead of freezing, they adapt. Instead of waiting for permission, they build. Instead of trusting promises, they rely on networks. 400 years of forced training created a people who know how to live when systems fail. That knowledge was not rewarded during periods of stability. It was often dismissed, mocked, or criminalized. But when the ground shifts, the value of that training becomes visible. This is not destiny, it is positioning. It does not guarantee success, it creates responsibility. Being trained for end time does not mean being spared difficulty. It means being expected to move through difficulty with enough clarity to carry others forward. The tragedy is that this training was extracted through suffering. The truth is that it exists nonetheless, and history does not waste capacity. When a moment arrives that requires endurance, memory, and adaptability, it draws from those who already carry them. That is why Black people are positioned here, not because of favoritism, because of formation, not because they wanted this role, because they were prepared for it long before the world realized it would need them. There is a kind of awareness that does not come from books, polls, or headlines. It comes from lived repetition. It is the ability to feel when something is off before it can be proven. Black people have developed this kind of historical intuition because they have had to. Survival required it long before it was ever named or respected. This intuition activates when systems begin to lie, not obvious lies, but subtle ones, when the language no longer matches the behavior, when institutions say one thing while preparing another, when promises are repeated louder instead of fulfilled. People trained to trust systems often miss these shifts because they are taught to believe statements over patterns. Black people learn to read patterns early. They sense when progress is being performed rather than practiced, when inclusion is symbolic rather than structural, when reforms are announced to calm unrest rather than to create change. This sensitivity is not cynicism, it is pattern recognition developed through experience. When you have been told repeatedly that things are improving while conditions remain unchanged, you learn to listen for what is not being said. The same intuition responds when power begins to panic. Panic in power does not look like fear. It looks like overreaction. It looks like sudden rule changes, excessive messaging, aggressive enforcement, and contradictions justified as necessity. When authority feels secure, it moves slowly and quietly. When it feels threatened, it becomes erratic. Black communities recognize this behavior because they have lived under it for generations. They have seen how quickly rights can be narrowed, how easily exceptions become policies, how emergency measures become permanent. When power starts explaining itself too much, something is wrong. When it starts punishing dissent disproportionately, something is wrong. When it starts blaming the vulnerable for systemic failures, something is wrong. This awareness often surfaces before mainstream acknowledgement. Black people feel the shift in tone before it appears in data. They notice changes in enforcement before they are debated publicly. They sense when institutions are preparing for control rather than service. This is not mystical. It is experiential. It is what happens when your safety depends on reading the room accurately. Because Black people were rarely protected by the system, they were forced to develop internal warning systems. They learned to trust instincts that others were trained to ignore. They learned that official reassurance often precedes harm. They learned that calm language can mask violent intention. Over time, this created a collective sensitivity to atmosphere, not just policy. This is why signals are read earlier. When trust has never been unconditional, vigilance becomes normalized. When promises have often been broken, people pay attention to behavior instead of words. When survival required anticipation, intuition becomes a tool rather than a luxury. In moments like this, that intuition becomes visible. While others debate whether the system is still legitimate, Black people notice how quickly it abandons its own principles. While others argue about intentions, Black communities observe outcomes. While others wait for confirmation, Black people feel the direction before the destination is announced. This does not mean they always have perfect clarity. Intuition does not eliminate uncertainty. It reduces surprise. It narrows the range of possible futures. It allows people to prepare emotionally and practically before conditions fully shift. That preparation often looks like skepticism to those still invested in appearances. The danger is that this intuition is often dismissed as negativity. When Black people warn that something is wrong, they are told they are overreacting. When they point out contradictions, they are accused of being divisive. This dismissal is itself a pattern. Systems prefer not to listen to those who can see through them. But history shows that those early warnings are rarely wrong. They are simply inconvenient. They challenge comfort. They disrupt narratives that people are not ready to abandon. By the time intuition becomes consensus, damage has already been done. In end-time conditions, this intuition becomes a form of leadership. Not leadership through authority, but through foresight. Those who can sense shifts early can adjust course sooner. They can conserve resources. They can warn others. They can begin building before collapse becomes obvious. This is why Black people often appear ahead of the curve during transitions. They are not predicting the future. They are recognizing the present more clearly. They are responding to signals others have been taught to ignore. Historical intuition is not accidental. It is the product of long exposure to unstable systems. It is the ability to feel when the ground is moving, even before the cracks appear. And in a moment when those cracks are spreading everywhere, that intuition is not just awareness, it is preparation. For many people, the idea of returning to normal feels comforting. Normal represents safety, predictability, and relief from uncertainty. It suggests that the disruption is temporary and that stability will eventually reassert itself. But that longing only exists if normal was ever truly safe to begin with. For Black people, it was not. Normal has never meant protection. It has never meant fairness. It has never meant security that could be relied upon without question. Under so-called normal conditions, Black communities faced disproportionate surveillance, economic exclusion, legal vulnerability, and cultural erasure. Normal included redlining, mass incarceration, underfunded schools, medical neglect, and constant negotiation for basic dignity. It required vigilance just to survive. Because of this history, there is no nostalgia for a past that worked. There is no emotional attachment to a system that never delivered what it promised. When disruption arrives, it does not feel like a fall from grace. It feels like continuity becoming visible to everyone else. The instability others now fear is an extension of conditions Black people have already learned to navigate. This absence of nostalgia creates a psychological advantage. People who believe they are losing something valuable resist change at all costs. They cling to structures even as those structures harm them. Fear of loss narrows thinking. It encourages denial and desperation. Black people, having little to lose from the collapse of a false normal, are freer to imagine alternatives. When you are not invested in restoring the past, you can focus on shaping the future. Energy is not spent trying to resurrect systems that never served you. It is directed toward building something that might. This shift in orientation matters. One group expends energy preserving illusions. Another expends energy preparing for transformation. This difference also creates a strategic advantage. Those desperate to return to normal are predictable. They will accept almost any compromise if it promises familiarity. They will overlook injustice if it restores comfort. Systems in decline exploit this desperation. They offer partial stability in exchange for silence and compliance. Black communities are less susceptible to this trade because the bargain has never paid out. Experience has taught that surface stability often masks deeper harm. This makes people cautious about promises of restoration. Instead of asking when things will go back to normal, they ask what is actually changing and who benefits. Not wanting to return to normal does not mean celebrating collapse. It means recognizing that collapse exposes what was already broken. It allows for honest assessment. When people are not emotionally tied to the old order, they can analyze it without sentimentality. They can identify which parts were useful and which were destructive. They can discard what failed without grief. This clarity supports adaptability. Adaptability is not optimism, it is realism. It accepts that the environment has changed and adjusts accordingly. Black people have practiced this repeatedly. Each generation learned how to live with shifting rules, unstable protections, and uncertain futures. They learned how to pivot when conditions changed unexpectedly. That practice becomes invaluable in transitional periods. The lack of attachment to normal also reduces panic. Panic thrives on the belief that something precious is being taken away permanently. When there is nothing to reclaim, panic loses its power. This does not eliminate stress, but it changes its expression. Stress becomes focus rather than chaos. Urgency becomes planning rather than paralysis. This psychological distance from normal also supports collective thinking. Instead of fighting individually to regain lost status, people can pool resources to build shared stability. When the goal is not restoration but reconstruction, collaboration becomes more natural. Community replaces competition as a survival strategy. Strategically, this position allows Black people to move earlier. While others wait for signals that normal might return, Black communities begin adjusting to the new reality. They seek alternatives, diversify support systems, and invest in resilience. Early movement creates options. Options create leverage. This is why the question of returning to normal does not resonate. Normal was never neutral. It was a system of managed instability that required constant negotiation just to exist within it. Letting go of that illusion is not loss, it is release. In moments of transition, those who are not trying to go back are better positioned to move forward. They are not burdened by nostalgia. They are not distracted by restoration fantasies. They are oriented toward what comes next. That orientation is not accidental. It was forged through history. And in a moment when many are desperate to rewind time, those who never benefited from normal are already facing the future with open eyes. Preparation is often misunderstood as panic. People hear the word and imagine fear-driven behavior, hoarding, paranoia, or withdrawal from the world. That misunderstanding keeps many people passive because they do not want to be seen as alarmist. But preparation, in moments like this, is not about fear. It is about clarity. It is about responding to reality without denial. The first shift is mental. It requires stopping the expectation that the system will save you. That expectation was cultivated deliberately. Systems teach dependence because dependence creates control. When people believe their survival is guaranteed by institutions, they surrender agency. They wait. They comply. They tolerate conditions they should challenge because they believe rescue will eventually arrive. End-time conditions expose the weakness of that belief. Systems under pressure prioritize their own survival first. They protect capital, authority, and legitimacy long before they protect people. Waiting for them to suddenly reverse that order is not hope. It is avoidance. Preparation begins when that illusion is released. This also means letting go of the idea that politics will deliver a miracle. Elections matter, but they do not replace responsibility. Political cycles promise relief every few years, encouraging people to pause their own development while they wait for change from above. That rhythm works during stable eras. It fails during transition. When structures are eroding, no single administration can restore what is fundamentally breaking. Waiting for political salvation keeps people emotionally invested in outcomes they cannot control. It drains energy that could be used to stabilize their own lives. It turns participation into spectatorship. Preparation requires stepping out of that posture. It requires recognizing that regardless of who holds office, conditions are shifting in ways that demand personal and communal adaptation. Taking responsibility for survival does not mean rejecting society or abandoning civic engagement. It means recalibrating expectations. It means understanding that no external force is more invested in your well-being than you are. When that understanding settles in, fear decreases rather than increases. Clarity replaces anxiety because you stop outsourcing your future to systems that are visibly struggling. Responsibility changes how people think about their choices. Time becomes intentional. Money becomes strategic. Relationships become essential. Skills become priorities rather than hobbies. Instead of assuming stability, people plan for variability. Instead of reacting to crises, they anticipate them. This mindset shift also changes emotional regulation. People who expect rescue experience despair when it does not come. People who accept responsibility experience urgency without panic. They move with purpose instead of desperation. They focus on what can be controlled rather than obsessing over what cannot. Preparation also involves grieving illusions. Letting go of the belief that the system will take care of you can feel like loss. It can feel unfair. That grief is real. But holding on to illusions costs more in the long run. Preparation asks for maturity. It asks for acceptance without resignation. When people stop waiting to be saved, they begin noticing options that were always available but ignored. They recognize their own capacity. They rediscover skills that were deprioritized in an era of convenience. They invest in networks that do not depend on fragile structures. They shift from consumer thinking to survival thinking. This is not pessimism. It is realism. It does not mean expecting the worst. It means being ready regardless of outcome. Prepared people are not the most fearful. They are the most stable. They do not need guarantees to move forward. They adapt as conditions change. The mental shift from dependence to responsibility is the foundation of all other preparation. Without it, every strategy remains superficial. With it, even limited resources become powerful. History shows this repeatedly. Those who endure transitions are not the ones with the most privilege. They are the ones who accepted responsibility early. Preparation begins in the mind. Not with fear, but with honesty. Not with panic, but with resolve. When people stop waiting for the system to save them, they reclaim agency. And agency is the first real step toward survival in an uncertain time. Preparation in this phase does not require becoming wealthy overnight. That idea is another distraction. It keeps people chasing outcomes instead of building foundations. The goal is not sudden prosperity. The goal is resilience. Resilience is what allows people to remain standing when rules change without warning. Economic preparation begins with flexibility. Flexibility means not tying your entire survival to a single source of income, a single employer, or a single industry. Systems in transition break unevenly. Some sectors collapse quickly while others adapt. People who can move their labor, skills, and time across different contexts are less exposed when one pathway closes. Flexibility is not about doing everything at once. It is about reducing fragility. It means developing abilities that can transfer across environments. It means understanding how to generate value in more than one way. When the rules of the game change, those who can adjust how they participate remain viable. Ownership is the second pillar. Ownership does not only mean property, though that can matter. It means owning assets that do not disappear when policies shift. Skills you control, platforms you manage, businesses you build, ideas you can execute independently. Ownership changes your relationship to uncertainty. Instead of reacting to decisions made elsewhere, you retain a degree of agency. Consumption alone does not create stability. It creates dependence. Ownership creates leverage. Even small forms of ownership compound over time because they reduce vulnerability. When people own nothing, every disruption feels catastrophic. When they own something, even modest assets provide options. Community is the third pillar, and it may be the most important. No one survives transition alone. Individual preparation without communal connection is incomplete. Communities distribute risk. They share information. They provide support when formal systems fail. Strong communities act as shock absorbers during instability. This is why cooperation matters more than competition in this phase. Internal competition weakens collective capacity. Cooperation multiplies it. When people share resources, knowledge, and opportunity, Everyone becomes more resilient. This does not require uniformity. It requires trust and alignment. Skills are the bridge between flexibility, ownership, and community. Skills allow people to contribute value regardless of the system they are in. Practical abilities become more important when abstract credentials lose power. Skills that solve real problems retain value when markets fluctuate. Skill preparation does not mean mastering everything. It means being useful. It means knowing how to fix, build, teach, grow, create, organize, or adapt. These skills anchor people in reality. They reduce dependence on distant institutions. They strengthen communities internally. Economic preparation is not about escaping society. It is about engaging it from a position of strength. When people can survive without constant approval from the system, they can choose how to participate. Choice is the real currency in uncertain times. Preparing in these areas also changes how people relate to fear. When survival feels possible, even if conditions worsen, fear loses its grip. Anxiety decreases because options increase. Preparation replaces helplessness with readiness. This is what it means to prepare for changing rules, not by predicting every outcome, but by building capacity that works across outcomes. When the game shifts, those who prepare do not need perfect foresight. They already have adaptability. Wealth may come later. Stability comes first. Flexibility, ownership, cooperation, and skills create a foundation that can withstand transition. Without them, people remain exposed. With them, people gain room to maneuver. The purpose of this preparation is not isolation. It is endurance. It allows individuals and communities to continue functioning when systems recalibrate. It creates continuity through change. Preparing this way is not dramatic. It is deliberate. It does not attract applause. It produces stability. And in moments when the rules of the world are being rewritten, stability is power. The deepest preparation in this moment is not external. It is internal. Economic plans can fail. Networks can fracture. Skills can be disrupted. But when identity is grounded and spiritual orientation is clear, people do not panic. They adapt. This is why preparation of the spirit and identity is not optional. It is foundational. The first danger to avoid is allowing belief to be colonized again. Colonized belief teaches submission without discernment. It disconnects people from agency by framing suffering as inevitable and questioning as disloyal. It demands loyalty to institutions instead of commitment to truth. That version of belief numbs rather than strengthens. In times of transition, numbness is lethal. Preparation requires reclaiming belief as a source of clarity, not sedation. Faith, spirituality, and moral grounding should sharpen awareness, not dull it. They should encourage responsibility, not passivity. When belief systems are used to discourage action, suppress memory, or justify injustice, they no longer serve the people who hold them. They serve power. Identity must also be protected from external capture. Media thrives on distortion. It simplifies complex realities into narratives designed to provoke emotion rather than understanding. When people allow media to define who they are, they inherit fear, outrage, and confusion. Identity becomes reactive instead of rooted. Political parties operate similarly. They offer belonging in exchange for loyalty. They reduce human experience to talking points. When identity becomes tied to party affiliation, people outsource their thinking. They defend contradictions. They excuse harm if it comes from their side. Preparation requires stepping back from this dynamic. Participation is possible without surrendering identity. Knowing who you are creates psychological stability. It removes the need to chase validation. It reduces susceptibility to manipulation. People who know themselves do not need constant reassurance from collapsing systems. They do not panic when narratives shift. They are not easily divided against their own interests. Identity clarity also reconnects people to lineage. Understanding that identity did not begin at trauma changes perspective. When people know their history extends beyond oppression, they carry dignity that systems cannot grant or revoke. This knowledge grounds decision-making. It anchors people when the environment becomes unstable. Spiritual preparation also involves discernment. Discernment is the ability to distinguish signal from noise. In end-time conditions, noise increases deliberately. Confusion benefits those who want to maintain control. Discernment protects focus. It allows people to conserve energy and invest attention wisely. This preparation does not require uniform belief. It requires integrity. It requires alignment between values and action. When people live in alignment, fear loses leverage. Even uncertainty becomes manageable because decisions are made from a place of coherence. Knowing who you are also clarifies boundaries. It helps people recognize which battles are theirs and which are distractions. Not every crisis requires engagement. Not every provocation deserves response. Identity clarity allows for strategic silence and intentional action. The absence of this preparation creates vulnerability. People without grounded identity are easily destabilized. They absorb anxiety from their environment. They oscillate between hope and despair based on headlines. They become reactive rather than deliberate. Preparation of the spirit is not withdrawal from the world. It is engagement without dependence. It allows people to move through chaos without being consumed by it. It creates resilience that cannot be legislated away. When belief is no longer colonized and identity is no longer outsourced, people become difficult to control. They do not need permission to exist fully. They do not wait for narratives to tell them what to feel. They interpret reality through a lens shaped by history, community, and inner grounding. This is why knowing who you are matters now more than ever, not as a slogan, but as a stabilizing force. In times when systems lose coherence, identity provides continuity. It allows people to remain whole while everything around them shifts. Those who prepare this way do not panic. They move, they observe, they build, they endure. And endurance, grounded in clarity, becomes power when the world is unsure of itself. This was never meant to be a message for everyone. It is not designed to persuade the undecided or comfort those who want reassurance that everything will return to the way it was. It is not a motivational speech, and it is not an argument. It is a signal, and signals are only received by those who are already listening. Some people will hear this and feel nothing. Others will reject it immediately. That response is not a failure. It is confirmation. Moments like this do not require mass agreement. They require alignment. History does not move because everyone understands it. It moves because a few recognize what time it is and act accordingly. This is not a video for spectators. It is for people who have already felt the shift before it was named. People who noticed that the ground feels different. People who sensed that the old explanations no longer fit. People who recognize that the speed of events is not accidental. If that recognition is not already present, nothing said here will create it. That is because calling is not informational. It is experiential. You do not reason your way into it. You feel it. It shows up as restlessness, urgency, and clarity mixed together. It does not scream. It presses. And only those who have been paying attention to that pressure will understand what is being asked of them now. End-time roles do not arrive twice. History does not reopen windows once they close. There is always a narrow period when movement is possible before conditions harden. That window is not open forever. It opens quietly, stays open briefly, and then closes without ceremony. Those who hesitate too long do not get another chance to respond in the same way. Preparation is not panic. Panic wastes energy. Preparation conserves it. Preparation is respect for timing. It is understanding that certain opportunities only exist during transition. Once structures settle, movement becomes harder. Once narratives stabilize, alternatives are marginalized. The time to build is always before collapse becomes undeniable. This is why urgency matters without hysteria. There is no need for fear, but there is a need for seriousness. Moments like this are not dramatic on the surface. They feel ordinary while carrying extraordinary weight. People often miss them because they expect spectacle. History rarely offers it. You were not born into this moment by accident. Generations lived and died without seeing what you are witnessing now. They endured without closure. They survived without resolution. They carried questions they knew they would not be alive to answer. That does not mean their endurance was wasted. It means it created space. You stand inside that space, not because you earned it individually, but because you inherited it collectively. The timing of your life matters. The position you occupy matters. History does not place people randomly at points of transition. It places those shaped by what came before. Trump is not the center of this story. He never was. He is a mechanism, a switch that was flipped when conditions were ready. He did not design the moment. He triggered it. Fixating on him misses the responsibility that has shifted elsewhere. The real role does not belong to any single figure. It belongs to those who recognize the moment and accept the weight that comes with that recognition. That weight is not glory. It is duty. It is the responsibility to prepare, to build, to remember, and to move deliberately when others are frozen. You do not need to announce this role. You do not need validation for it. You do not need permission. History does not wait for approval. It moves through those who are willing to carry what it requires. The question now is simple and unavoidable. Not whether this moment is real, but whether you will respond to it. Not whether the system will change, but whether you will be ready when it does. Not whether others believe you, but whether you are aligned with what you already know. The door has opened. It will not remain open indefinitely. What happens next depends less on those who flip the switch and more on those who understand why it was flipped. The role is not abstract. It is practical. It is lived. And it is already in motion. What you do now is the answer.